The hospital doors slid open, but the pounding in my chest drowned out every sound around me. I tightened my grip around Ava's shoulders as she struggled to stay on her feet. Just 30 minutes earlier, we had been joking over breakfast. Now her face had turned ghostly pale, and every step looked like a battle. The nurse rushed over with a wheelchair, but Ava quietly shook her head. She looked at me instead, forcing a weak smile, as if she wanted to convince me everything would be okay. I wanted to believe her, but something deep inside me whispered that this ordinary morning was about to change both of our lives forever. And I had no idea that a single sentence, written only minutes later, would reveal a truth that had been hiding in silence for years. While the nurses took Ava inside for examination, I stayed alone in the waiting area, trying to calm my racing thoughts. We had shared the same apartment for almost 3 years. It wasn't supposed to last that long. We had met through a rental listing when we were both trying to rebuild our lives. I worked long days restoring old cars, while Ava had just started her first job as an elementary school teacher. We agreed on one simple rule: respect each other's privacy. Somehow, those two strangers slowly became the person each of us relied on the most. Neither of us ever said it out loud, but home had quietly stopped being the apartment. Home had become each other. Over time, our lives fell into a rhythm that neither of us planned. Every morning, Ava left a fresh cup of coffee on the kitchen counter before heading to school. Without saying a word, I made sure her car was always running perfectly. If something broke around the apartment, I fixed it before she even noticed. We celebrated birthdays with homemade dinners, laughed over terrible movies, and spent quiet evenings watching the city lights from our tiny balcony. Anyone looking at us would have thought we were already a couple. The only people who didn't believe it were the two of us. The truth was, I had fallen in love with Ava long before I was willing to admit it. But fear is a convincing liar. I kept telling myself she deserved someone more successful, someone with a bigger future, than a mechanic who was still trying to put his own life back together. So I buried my feelings and chose silence instead. It seemed safer to protect our friendship than risk losing her completely. What I didn't realize was that sometimes the biggest mistakes in life aren't the chances we take. They're the words we never have the courage to say. That morning had started like every other. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window as Ava laughed about one of her students who insisted the moon followed the school bus home every afternoon. Then, without warning, her smile disappeared. She reached for the edge of the table. Her breathing became uneven, and the color drained from her face. Before I could ask what was wrong, her knees gave way. I caught her just in time. Within minutes, we were racing toward the nearest urgent care clinic, and neither of us knew that the hardest part of the day was still waiting ahead. The nurses wheeled Ava through the doors while I was asked to stay behind. The waiting room suddenly felt too quiet. Every second seemed to stretch into a full minute as I stared at the clock, imagining every possible outcome. Then a receptionist walked over and handed me a clipboard. "We just need you to confirm a few details," she said with a gentle smile. As I glanced down at the form, one handwritten line caught my attention. I froze. It wasn't her address. It wasn't her phone number. It was something she had written beside the emergency contact section. Something I was never supposed to see. My eyes stayed fixed on that single sentence. Instead of writing roommate, Ava had written, "The person who has always felt like home." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I read the words again, wondering if stress was making me imagine them. Before I could process what they meant, a nurse stepped into the waiting room. "Are you Elias?" she asked. When I nodded, she smiled softly. "She asked for you the moment she woke up. She said you're the only person she wants here." At that moment, I realized the feelings I had spent years hiding might never have been one-sided after all. A few minutes later, the doctor finally walked into the waiting room. I stood up before he even said a word. He smiled gently. "She's going to be okay." The tension that had been crushing my chest finally began to fade. He explained that weeks of stress, skipped meals, and constant exhaustion had pushed her body too far. When Ava was discharged that afternoon, the world looked exactly the same. Cars filled the streets. People hurried past without noticing us. But for me, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The silence during the drive home wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with thoughts I could no longer ignore. That evening, I helped her settle onto the couch, made her a simple bowl of soup, and placed a glass of water beside her. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you for staying." She had no idea that I had already made a promise to myself. If life was giving me a second chance, I wasn't going to waste it by hiding the truth any longer. The next afternoon, while Ava was resting, I stepped onto our small balcony with 2 cups of coffee. When she joined me, neither of us spoke at first. The city buzzed below, but everything between us felt still. Finally, I took a deep breath. "I've been hiding something for a long time," I said. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I was afraid of losing what we already had." She looked at me without interrupting. "I don't just care about you, Ava," I admitted. "Somewhere along the way, you became the person I couldn't imagine living without." For a moment, the world seemed to stop as she quietly reached for my hand. Ava looked down at our hands and smiled through the tears in her eyes. Then she whispered something I never expected to hear. I was afraid too. She told me that for years she had wanted to say the same thing, but convinced herself that our friendship was too precious to risk. The note on the clinic form wasn't meant to be a confession. It was simply the truth she wanted written somewhere if she never got the chance to say it herself. We both laughed softly at how 2 people could live under the same roof for years and still be afraid to speak the words that mattered most. That night, nothing about our apartment changed, but somehow everything felt different. Months later, we realized something important. Love was never created in one dramatic moment. It was built quietly, through thousands of small choices. A cup of coffee left on the counter, a broken chair repaired without being asked, a meal shared after a difficult day. The little things we thought were ordinary were actually the moments that brought us closer. Looking back, that frightening day at the clinic wasn't the beginning of our story. It was the moment we finally stopped pretending. Sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't someone you meet in a perfect moment. Sometimes, they're the person who has been standing beside you all along. If this story reminded you that kindness, honesty, and courage still matter, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And remember, the greatest love stories are often hidden inside the simplest moments.